Welcome to the Lights Camera Pro podcast, where we interview entertainment pros about their careers and how they became successful in the industry. The secrets to their success here every week. Here's your host, Sean Ventura.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Lights Camera Pro podcast. I'm your host, Sean Ventura, and I just want to say subscribe to our YouTube page, like and share our Facebook page, and download at Apple and Google Podcasts. Our guest today is Dean Velez. He's a creative innovator and the founder of Anvil Studios. He has a ton of stories about After Effects, VR, and crazy 2D effects. He's such a fun guy. It's going to be a fun interview. Here we go. All right, so let's just get started. I'm here with Dean Velez, who I've known of for years because I used to do his Anvil tutorials years and years ago for After Effects, but I've never met him. And it's good to meet you here today. And Dean is a creative innovator is what we've come up with because he does so many things. And if you want to expound on that, Dean, you more than are welcome to. But as far as the first question that we're going to get into is, how did you know that you were going to be in the TV industry? At what age were you? Where were you? How did that happen?
Well, my goal was never to be in the television industry. That was just life. When I was a lot younger, let's say under 10, I was a big, huge fan of comic books. Okay. And I wanted to be a comic book creator. To what extent, I never knew. I was a big fan of the X-Men and the Chris Claremont, John Byrne connection of this team. And I respected both of these creatives immensely. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll be a writer. And then if I'm not a writer, I will be an illustrator. I'll be a comic book illustrator. But it's going to be one of these two things. And I just wanted to be centered around comic books. What I didn't realize is what I should have said is I want to be centered around storytelling. Okay. Because it was bigger than comic books. I just was too young and I hadn't experienced anything else that I felt like I could do. Film was something that was so grandiose and television so grandiose, and even animated cartoons. I didn't even have the knowledge base to say I want to do that. To me, that was just magic. But comic books were this physical material that I could hold in my hands, and I understood what drawing was, and I understood what writing was. So my 10-year-old brain gravitated towards that. Mm-hmm. What got me into television was lack of employment. Okay. I finished school. It was in 91 or 92. And I was headed home to New York. And I'm not kidding, this was like my lease was up, my bags were packed. I was getting on a Greyhound bus and taking the trip to New York. Right. And the job placement person, Luin Sanchez, said to me, "Hey, Dean, don't you know how to animate?" And I said, "No, I took an animation class. I do not know how to animate, but I understand the principles of animation." And she said, "Well, there's this company looking for animators. Do you want to interview?" And I said, "Sure." So my theory on interviewing has always been do every interview just for the experience. Right. Don't worry about the job. Just for the experience of talking to people and finding out what they do. And maybe you'll get a tour of their facility. And maybe you'll get knowledge. Okay. But it was never to get a job. I've never interviewed for a job. I've interviewed for the experience, and that has just somehow worked in my favor. Mm. So I went there, and they did simple cell animation, and they said, "Can you do an animation test?" This is not something I'm not proud of, by the way, but this is part of the story. Right. They said, "Could you do an animation test?" And I said, "Sure." And I went to, this is when Borders was still around. I went to Borders and looked in the animation section, and I found a book by Preston Blair, who's a Disney animator. Went home, got out my trusty light box, and I traced over Preston Blair's illustrations. And he had a sparrow flying. I made it an eagle. He had a horse running. I made it, I think, a unicorn. Again, not interested in getting this job. Just going through the motions.
Right.
And they loved it, as well they should. It's freaking Preston Blair. And somehow they hired me.
Wow.
And I had to spend 2 years learning how to animate. And every day I picked up that Preston Blair book and just studied it and studied it. And one of those things, what is it? Fake it till you make it?
Yeah.
You know that terminology? I don't recommend that. I worked 16 hours a day trying to understand. I went to school again by myself before the internet, just buying these animation books.
Right.
Lack of sleep, scared every day. Knew, not even imposter syndrome, actual full knowing I'm an imposter, and waiting for the day that they would fire me. And somehow they made me creative director.
Wow.
And I ended up working with real animators. I ended up being 22 years old, creative director, working with animators from Disney. That was insane.
That is insane.
Yeah, it was a weird way to start. The one thing I had over the traditional animators is I've always had an aptitude for computers.
Okay.
And understanding how they work, and also understanding how to make them work differently. So I think that's why I fit. So I stopped drawing and I started compositing their drawings and coloring their drawings and inking and doing this all on equipment that wasn't meant to do this, because we didn't even know what the equipment should be.
Right.
And the leap to television was, I love the guys I work with, but geez, they mismanaged the money. We had a great product, and I don't know what happened, but we ran out of money, and I was let go. And I walked into the network, Univision Network. I happened to call them because, get a load of this. This is before the internet, right? So your contacts were whatever was in the yellow pages. Mm-hmm. And I just started calling people in the yellow pages, and Univision is in the yellow pages. The television network is in there. Right. I called them up, and it just so happened, weirdly enough, I went straight to the art director, or creative director, and he had graduated from the same school. And on that basis alone got me my first interview. Because he wanted, and he said this specifically, he wanted to talk about a couple of teachers. And I was like, sure, I'll come in. I got in there. We had a great conversation. I really wasn't, I didn't even know what Univision did. I'll be totally honest.
Right.
I never watched the channel, even though I'm Puerto Rican. I don't speak Spanish, so the channel serves no purpose for me.
Right.
But it was something, and he liked my work, and he said, I got some freelance I'd like to hire you for. Well, it just so happened that I had a child coming, not myself personally, but my ex-wife.
Right.
And I said, no. I said, if I don't have insurance and stability, I won't take the job. And I explained why. It wasn't like I was like, this is who I am. It was, I just need stability. Then he offered me part-time. And I said, no, it's only full-time. He said, well, we have no full-time positions. I was doing a favor for you. And I go, as much as I like that, but I have to stick to my guns. Thankfully, the next day I got a job with Gray Advertising.
Okay.
Doing, I don't know if you know what these are. They're called circus ads, where they're a full page of buy this car for $7.99, buy this car for $2,000, buy this car, one owner before this, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I decided I would hate my life, but I had to do it. My wife at the time called me up and said, hey, George Dominguez called and said he wants to talk to you. I called him up. He said, you know what? You got the job. He goes, there is no job, but you got it.
Nice.
He goes, we're not budgeted for this. We're not scheduled for a new employee. We don't even need a new employee. He goes, so your pay's not going to be great, but it's full-time and it has insurance. And I walked over to the art director at Gray Advertising, and I quit after 4 hours. He thanked me because I quit before I wasted his time. Right. And he said, and I remember this to this day, I wish everybody would do this. Which everybody would quit this fast. I said, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't need any money.
Right.
This ain't for me.
No, but there's definitely something to the fake it till you make it, because I've heard several stories about that. This one guy, Steve Daly, the manager didn't want to hire him, but all the other people did at the MSG network. And he just went in. He went back like George Costanza and went in for a week and worked for free until they hired him. And
I love that.
They eventually hired him. And even for me, I had messed around with Avid on I made a short film in San Francisco. I messed around with it. Spent a week with Avid, and I had an opportunity to get my first real video editing job. And they were like, it's NSYNC Speed Razor. Do you know how to use it?
Yeah, I remember that.
And I was like, absolutely. So I literally had the manual the very first day while I was cutting a sizzle reel for some effects company and cutting it to me and figuring it out as I edited on my first day.
Yeah.
And eventually stayed there for a while. But yeah, faking it till you make it. And then one other question. In college, were you doing any kind of illustration or effects or anything like that? Or did you have a totally different major?
I went to 2 colleges. The first college I went to was Joe Kubert in Dover, New Jersey for comic book illustration.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed there, but the comic book industry was actually failing. This is before indie comics. This is before the Marvel Revolution.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they weren't doing well before the whole Marvel thing. Sure.
Yeah, they were going bankrupt. So I had talked, and all of my instructors were in the comic book industry. So we actually had a pulse on what was happening. Now, where I grew up in the Bronx, and I will say, if we weren't poor, we lived next door to poor. Mm. And I just didn't want to be broke.
Right.
And the comic industry was very hard. And it might have been tanking. So I went to one of my teachers and said, I want to be an artist, but I'll be totally honest. I want to make a living. I want to make a substantial living. Not anything rich or anything, but I just want to be, I don't want to be poor or struggling. I've done it. I don't want to do it anymore. I've seen what toll it takes. And they said, well, get into advertising. So I switched to a school for print advertising and design. So my degree is in copywriting and graphic design. Okay. I've been able to use what I learned in the video business because I adapted. But one of the things that I did while I was in college was a teacher, Mike Carnegie, God bless his soul, he's passed away since, became my mentor. And he saw things in me that I didn't even know I was capable of. And one of them was teaching. So he invited me, and I was paid by the school to teach on the weekends with him. So he taught workshops for caricature, and I taught workshops for narrative art and storytelling. Right. And composition of the page and all of this stuff. Cool. Again, he saw that. I didn't know I could do that. He saw that I had that in me. But that was my first foray into wearing one of the many hats I ended up wearing was teaching. Right. And I found out that I had something I also didn't know I had, which was just patience. I had the ability to talk to someone till we got through whatever the problem was in art. I was capable enough to give them confidence when they didn't have confidence in themselves. And again, I don't know where that freaking comes from at all. But that was my first foray into that, and it made school so much fun. Because every weekend I got to teach a new class. It was only really a 2-day class, and I would meet new people, and I gained new friends, and watch them progress with their projects after the class. Because all of them went to the school. Some of them didn't. Some of them were younger. I think the youngest person in there might have been 13. Because it was a workshop. Right. And it was a blast. It was an absolute blast.
Right. So, and maybe a little bit of foreshadowing into the future where
it was absolutely.
Yeah. We'll talk about later, but your having your own company and training people and helping people learn.
Okay, so when I started Univision, there's some things to understand. I had never worked on a paint box. This was the first time I had ever worked on the system. And not only had I never worked on a paint box, the only time to actually get on the system was when everybody left. I think I was hired because George was just a nice guy. Because he hired me, and when he said we really don't have room for a full-time employee, he actually meant it.
Yeah.
Because there were no computers to work on. So I was in a situation, and the situation was this. My wife at the time was going to have a baby. I was going to be fired at any moment for not being able to work on their systems. In my opinion, I was going to be fired.
Right.
And so I have, how do I say this correctly? I grew up in an environment where you always had to solve the problem. Growing up in the Bronx, you never know what's going to happen on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
It is actually a very dangerous place to grow up. And so you had to have a level of street smarts and an amount of chutzpah and gumption and everything to immediately solve a problem at a young age, because your parents probably were not going to get to you in time for whatever the situation was.
Right.
So what I saw was I was in a situation and I had to solve this situation on my own. And this was not something I was going to go to my creative director with. This was something I had to solve.
Right.
So I realized that the studio, television stations never close. They're a 24-hour facility.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized that the news went off at the news team, or the news art team, left at around 11:30. And that was when the entire art department was open. So what I would do is I would read the manual for the paint box. Now, this is not a friendly manual, if anybody's aware of the paint box. It's built, the manual is made by engineers. It's very complicated. So what I would do is my day started at 9. So I would start at 9 and I would read all the way to 11:30. And then I would work overnight on the Quantel. I stayed at Univision. They didn't realize this. I stayed at Univision 3 days straight.
Wow.
And taught myself the paint box in 3 days. And in that first week, I took my first assignment. I requested my first assignment.
Okay.
And from there, I was given a paint box. I was actually allocated time. A new paint box had come in, the Quantel HAL. It was a HAL or a Henry, and it was an animation device. And they pretty much gave it to me in the mornings because no one knew how to use it, and I was the quickest at learning. Like I said, I've always had an aptitude for software.
Right.
And in that first week, I was up and going and like I was there for years. The funny part of Univision, I'm going to tell you some real quick stories. One, I didn't speak Spanish. So whenever somebody talked to me in Spanish, I kind of just used context clues. like they handed me something, like I had a logo, that meant I had to animate it. And one of the art directors who befriended me, Luz Cardones, became my guardian angel by being in every single meeting that I was in and deciphering later and telling me what my assignments were. This lasted probably 3 months before someone figured it out. And she saw the doe-eyed look I had on my face and said, "How do you pronounce your last name?" And I go, "Velez." She goes, "No, it's Velez." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then she said, "You don't speak Spanish." And I said, "Nah, I don't. I don't speak a word of it."
That's so funny because Velez, yeah. So you have Hispanic sounding last name.
Yeah.
Ventura, my last name is Italian, but it's also Hispanic. And
Yes.
a lot of Mexicans have that last name. And I would go to this bodega in New York City because I was in New York City for 12 years. I lived in the Lower East Side.
Okay.
But I ended up in Brooklyn, 5th and DeGraw by the park there. I forget the name of the park. Prospect Park, maybe. And I would go in there and these guys would say like, what's your name? And I'd be like, Sean Ventura. And they'd start speaking to me in Spanish.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh man, you want some mamajuana? And I'm like, I don't know what any of this is. I'm just trying to get some SpaghettiOs, man, or some ramen. And yeah, so sometimes people make the mistake thinking because of your last name that you speak Spanish.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's like a curse because she went to my creative director and George came out with her and they both looked at me and they're like, why didn't you say you didn't speak Spanish? I go, well, that was never asked. So I never told. I go, I've been here 3 to 6 months. I've been here 3 to 6 months and I've did everything correct, right? They're like, yeah. I go, well, I'm getting by. I'm doing something right. And the producers really liked me. The producers just got together and decided that when they talk to me, they talk in English. But while they're talking in English, they're also berating me for not speaking Spanish. So it was this weight I carried every time going, here comes Dean. He does not speak Spanish.
Yeah.
And I lasted a good year there, and it was the most fun I ever had. Some claims to fame as me and the art director started a fire in the art department because we wanted to get that bonanza look.
Oh.
So we got a lasagna pan, water, and some parchment paper. And we came in early before anybody came in and lit the parchment paper. What we didn't realize is that the embers and the burning paper would start floating and drifting. So we ran around that morning putting out tiny fires.
Right.
It was the best experience.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of stories, Dean, about people trying to do stuff like that in camera for effects because you didn't have the effects. No. You didn't have Video Copilot or whatever it is, these plugins that are incredible that are already shot. And you kind of had to figure it out. And even Art David talks about that, about how he had to work on the bullet scene for The Matrix and kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
And try and do some of it, like half of it was in camera, half of it wasn't, because some of that stuff didn't exist, like the elements.
Yeah. And I think that was the best part of the industry, because I remember we would drop ink in water. We would drop milk in water. I actually made a live train set for one of our shows, Premio Lo Nuestro.
Right.
And I basically said, George, I want to make a live train set. I want to make it a circus set. And I just made it by hand, just me in my living room. And we filmed it. And I had no idea if it would work. And it got a great response. I did hand-drawn animation. I captured frame by frame by frame, on a camera stand. That one, and that was when. So I was 24, and that was we had about 30 artists, and that year, a claim to fame for me was out of the 30 artists that submitted for the Emmys, that hand-drawn piece was the only one that won.
Oh, cool!
And that was done on a computer that only had the software doesn't exist anymore. Only had 256 colors,
right?
And was had to open on a PC in DOS.
Ooh.
It cost $186. It was a toy, basically, for animation. And that's when I realized it doesn't matter how much money you have. The quality of the work is dependent on the quality of the person.
Yes.
Because this was on, so Quantels were like, I don't know, almost $100,000, $250,000. And this was done on a PC running DOS. And that was that was a game changer. Like all of these early jobs that I had, they really were a game changer in what my career would become. And that was definitely one of it. Doing the live effects and building things with my hands and actually physically drawing and capturing frames, that was instrumental to my mindset.
But there was like an explosion around that time of the Henry and the Hal, and then you had the Flame and the Flint. I worked at actually Click 3X in
oh yeah, I know who they are,
in New York. At the time, it was $1,200 for a flame room per hour.
Yes. Oh, the good old days.
Insanity.
The good old days.
Absolute insanity. And I remember going into a session and the client was an advertising company and they were doing a perfume ad. And they're like, okay, we want him to take the model, take the perfume bottle and dribble it and shoot it up into the sun. And I was like, no way, you can't. And obviously they did it. It took them a while to animate it, but they did it. And stuff like that was just crazy, man, at that time.
Yeah,
you
was
could do crazy things.
I tell my son, he's 25. I'm like, you have no idea what rock stars we used to be. I'm like, you have no idea. I'm like, I was treated like gold.
Yes.
And I was paid so much money.
Oh my God. I worked at McCann Erickson for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I had an edit room that could seat about 20 people.
Yes. Yeah. Remember those?
And we ordered $50 worth of sushi for lunch. And I had beer in the fridge. It was insanity.
Yeah.
Like that. Now they're trying to put us in cubes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just complete opposite. And the effects guys did better too. You know what I mean? Like they had nicer rooms and made more money. So
yeah, we were rock stars.
Yeah. Rock stars. Totally.
We were full on rock stars.
Yeah.
I could not be fired.
Yeah.
It didn't matter what I did.
No one else knew how to do it. There was like one guy in England and one guy in Poland.
Exactly. Especially for the Quantels, who could get their hands and the Flames. Who had the money to even practice? It can't be a hobby.
Yeah. Nobody.
You couldn't go to school
for it.
now
where you could download Adobe for $30 and $20
and learn it.
Learn everything with tutorials on YouTube. It's Yeah. I could tell you stories, but we want to talk about you. So what happens after Univision?
Univision. So my son is born, and my wife, my ex-wife, says we can't live like this because remember I said I came in at a reduced salary, and they're a big corporation. All they can do is give you your 4% raise. That's just the way it is.
That's the way it is.
Yeah. There's not a conversation about it. Now, the amazing thing is my boss actually went and got me a 10% raise. And the producers actually fought for me. This was wild. This was just like a family. Fought for me to get even more.
Wow.
But that's all the corporation would give. So on that day, I said, I'm at such a low salary that 10%, it's just a drop in the bucket. It doesn't help me. I said, I just want to be leveled off with everybody else. I've proven myself. I'm just as good as anybody here. So let's just level me off. Let's use that as the conversation. And what I said to my boss was, I'll give you 6 months to change this. And I said, and he goes, then what happens? I said, I'm going to quit. I go, that just has to happen. It's an is situation. It's not because I don't like working here. I can't live like this. And I was true to my word. I gave him 6 months. And a week before the 6 months was out, and I said, were you able to change it? He goes, no, but I fought for you, but I can't do anything. I said, okay, I'll be gone in a week. Now, I hadn't looked for a job. I just said, I'll be gone in a week. And he's like, where are you going? I said, I have no idea. So a friend of mine called me up and said where he was applying, and he said, you should apply too. And it was for a television news station. I said, I know nothing about news. But I applied, and they flew me over to St. Petersburg, Channel 10, CBS station, CBS affiliate. And I knew I didn't get the job. I didn't even know why I was in the interview. All of my stuff was cartoon work.
Right.
So the promotions manager drives me back to the airport,
but we get there late. So, and the next flight isn't for like 6 hours or something ridiculous. And I call her up. Her name is Barbara. And I said, Barbara, I just want you to know I'm stuck at the airport for about 6 hours. My flight, we were late getting back. And she said, oh my God, I'll come get you. And she gave me a tour of St. Petersburg, Florida. And we just talked about life.
Right.
A week later, she called me and she said, you're hired. And later on, I asked her, why would you hire me when I have no skill sets to do what you wanted me to do? She goes, yeah, but you're the person I liked the most. And she
That's
said,
cool.
And she said, I knew you could do the job, even though you didn't have anything that showed the job. She said, but our conversation just proved your tenacity. Right. And she said, I haven't seen that in a long time. And she said, our executive producer thinks you can do it. And she signed off on it. Now I'm signing off on it. And you have the job. And let me tell you, Sean, I did not have experience enough to take that job. I was 25 years old, and I had a staff of 5 that were all more experienced than me, and all 10 years my senior.
Wow.
And it was just another adventure, and it was the best adventure because they got me over to Channel 10 by saying they would buy me a Quantel HAL, something to animate with, that they had earmarked $120,000 for the art department. Well, by the time I got there, the weather department took that $120,000 and invested in some weather software. And all that was left over in the budget was $10,000. Which, you know, in those days, this is 1995. Mm-hmm. In those days, $10,000 could get you like 3 fonts for the Quantel. Just, you know, it was,
right.
You know, everything was so expensive. Well, when I was cleaning out the previous art director's desk, I found a proposal for something called After Effects that a high school intern had written up how the future of the art department was going to be. His name was Hans Mathery, and we're still friends to this day. And I went into the promotions manager's office and I showed her this paper and I said, who's this, because I didn't know it was a kid. I thought it was one of the engineers. Who's this Hans Mathery? She goes, he's an intern. And she said, quoting, he's kind of like a Viking. I go, what do you mean? He's got long red hair. He's big guy. He's like 6'4", 6'2", something. She said, yeah, he reminds me of and he's got a beard, a really long beard. He looks like Eric the Red. And I said, can I call him? She's like, yeah, I don't care. He's a good kid. And I called him, and it happened that he was in the magnet program at a high school, in the video magnet program.
Right.
And they had just introduced all of this software. No one in our industry knew what After Effects was yet. Right. It wasn't even being mentioned. And he came in and he didn't demonstrate it. He just told me what it can do. And I'm like, well, I got $10,000. I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pay you 2. And what can you get me with 8? And he got me a clone Mac. We couldn't even afford a real Mac. He got me a clone Mac. Right. And you remember the Adobe stuff didn't come in a suite back then. It was all separate purchases.
Right.
And he purchased all this stuff. And I didn't know what After Effects was. So I actually started using Premiere. And I used Premiere like it was After Effects.
Oh, okay.
So I did all my compositing Premiere. And then he came in one day to service the machines and was like, so show me what you got. He goes, that's amazing. He said, I told you After Effects was cool. I go, oh, I'm using Premiere. He goes, dude, if you can do this in Premiere, which you can do in After Effects will blow you away. And that was the start of After Effects for me. It was that first version. And
let me just ask you, so let me just understand, this guy was at your work, or you found a paper about him and called him and he lived in the same?
Yeah, he lived in St. Petersburg.
Okay.
He was in high school. He was all of 16 years old.
And this is the guy who created After Effects.
No. This is the guy that introduced me to After Effects.
Oh, okay.
What he created was a monster. That's what he created.
Okay.
Because what he did, and this is what I mean by he created a monster, he was a tech guy. He knew how to build computers. He knew how to wire systems. He knew all of that, all of the technical stuff. Well, now you have me who likes to experiment with things, but doesn't have the ability to do tech stuff.
Right.
But now I have this 16-year-old kid who will try anything. He's fearless.
Right.
So it led. So
Very
how,
cool.
Yeah. So how we moved After Effects into just After Effects into something that worked in a television station is I had to figure out how to get my files into the editing department. So what I would do is lay off a sequence of TGAs onto a Bernoulli and then pass it to the editor. And then they'd have to take that and put it to a 1-inch tape.
Yep.
So I gave them layers and they would composite on 1-inch or no, 3/4 inch. And it was silly. So I was like, there's got to be a better way to get these digital files across. So I brought in Hans and I said, I want to patch into the whole building. And he goes, will they allow you to do that? I go, well, I'm not going to ask permission. I go, tell me it's possible first. He goes, absolutely. We'd wire into this. We have to get an output card for your, it was the velocity card. We have to get an output card for your computer, and then we could patch in. I go, how much is a card? I got the budget for it. I didn't tell my boss what it was for. I bought a lot of cable, like hundreds of feet of cable. And at 3 a.m. at night, we went into the ceiling tiles and rewired the building.
Okay, is that BNC cable or is that like a network cable?
No, that wasn't network. That was RGB cables.
Okay.
So we ran RGB cables throughout the building. I ran it to the news studio, on-air news studio. I ran it to all the edit bays. And we did it for a week. We would just run these cables. And then secretly, one day I flipped the switch and we were live on air. I could get my animations directly to the TD. Wow. I could get my animations directly to all the edit suites, and I could get my animations all the way to the Quantel paint boxes. So everywhere that there was a means of output, we connected. Now, I need you to understand, this is a fireable offense.
Yeah.
This is me never working in the industry again. This is being blackballed if I did it wrong. This is me quite possibly ruining an on-air broadcast.
Right. I mean, it'd be completely unheard of today, but
yeah, it was a lot looser then. It was the Wild West.
Is this where your company comes in? You start to build your company?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because, and I think why most companies fail is someone goes and says, I'm going to build a company. I'm like, that's the death knell right there.
Right.
Because you don't know how much goes into that. What that statement you just said, you have no idea what goes into it. Because I started in a way, I guess it was more pure or more organic. It was really easy to become a company.
Okay.
Because it was never about being a company. It was about the same thoughts I had in the beginning. I want to share this information. I want more people to know this. I want better quality work. I don't care about anything else. Well, that can be turned into a company. So the problem with the first run of trying to get this off the ground was I got noticed. I was at ACS, Atlanta CAD Services, and they have a huge warehouse, and they do something called a NAB after party.
Okay.
And what they do is they invite all the players inside Atlanta who are in broadcast, and they invite all of the salespeople from all of the broadcast software into this warehouse. And they have food and drinks, and it's a good time, and there's good music. And I told Billy, I want to be in. And he goes, what do you sell? I go, I don't want to sell anything. He goes, what are you going to do? I go, I want to do magic tricks. And he goes, what the hell are you talking about? I go, I want to show people how fast After Effects is and how easy it is to do. I want to take, because what I saw was not a lot of artists were switching to After Effects because of the intimidation factor, because it was layers and not nodes, and everything else was nodes.
Right.
A lot of people weren't switching because they thought After Effects was a toy, because, you know, coming from a $250,000 price point to a, I don't know, $2,000 price point, that means it doesn't work.
Right.
So I had a magic trick, which was I would carry around a print design book. And it was just a picture book, you know, of good layout and good design. And I called it Pick a Page. That's a stupid name, but this is what it was. Right. I called it Pick a Page, and I set up my little booth, and I set up After Effects with dual monitors. And I said, here's what we're going to do. I want you to open up this book and pick a page. And in less than 30 minutes, much less than 30 minutes, I will have reproduced everything you see from scratch and have it animated. Now, understand, I practiced constantly to have my speed.
Right.
So I had so many tricks. And before the event was over, so this is like 4-hour, maybe 6-hour event. Before the event was over, I had stolen all of the foot traffic from everybody else.
Cool.
Because I put on a show.
Right.
And
I mean, back then, what you were doing was amazing. Like,
back then,
it's hard to explain how amazing that was that you could do that compared to these other really expensive machines.
Correct. So everybody had a big machine. Everybody had expensive software. Everybody had talent on just that machine. Now, I'm using After Effects, Photoshop, Illustrator, and everything, and a kitchen sink to put this together.
Right.
So, again, at that time, that's unheard of. It was very early in the After Effects adoption.
Right.
And what just so happened was Billy had put the Adobe booth, and it's a small booth, it's just a table and a drape, right next to me. He planned that. He did that on purpose.
Okay.
I didn't even know that Adobe was next to me.
Nice. Because
we're looking out. We're not looking across, and you can't see any of the signage unless they're facing you. So I didn't know it was Adobe. So people were coming up to him, Ron Richards, were coming up to Ron, and Ron kept pointing them to my table. He's like, yeah, I could answer that, but that guy is probably going to answer it better. And at the end of the evening or day or whatever, Ron came up to me and he said, I'm Ron Richards. I'm from Adobe. Handed me his card, and he just said, we'll be in touch.
Nice.
It was very movie-like.
Yeah.
It was very movie-like. And then the operations manager from After Effects, specifically, Steve Kaliski, contacted me and just hired me to do presentations. And but he wanted scripted presentations.
Okay.
So he didn't want any pick-a-page type crap. So this is my first NAB. I've never been to NAB before, and I'm going to NAB as a presenter for Adobe.
Cool.
So you know how big, if you've ever been to NAB, the Adobe presentation probably has, I don't know, 100 people in attendance, maybe even more. They do a big booth. So as I'm walking to the booth with Steve, I go, hey, Steve. He goes, what? I go, do you trust me? And he goes, I don't even know you. And I go, okay, well, we're going to build trust today. And he goes, what are you talking about? Now, we're walking up to the booth. I'm scheduled to walk up. He's walking me to the booth.
Right.
I'm scheduled to do a scripted presentation that he has approved. And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, I changed the presentation a little bit. And you could see this man's face went red. It's like, this is NAB. You don't do that.
Don't mess with NAB. Yeah.
Don't mess with NAB. We're Adobe. Don't mess with us.
Yeah.
You know, kid, I don't even know you. I took you on to, all these things that I could only imagine are going through his head. I said, I'm going to do something cool. Trust me. And he goes, Dean, you'll never work again. I go, nah, I'm going to work again. Trust me. So I had 2 presentations. There's an hour in between. Get up on stage, and Steve sits in the front row in the very center, looking at me on the podium, red-faced.
Right.
I pull out of my duffel bag, like my backpack. I pull out this print graphic design book, and I go, guys, we're going to do something different today. And I'm not saying I'm not going to fail. I go, someone's going to pick a page from this book, and without any resources, I'm going to build a whole thing in front of you, talk through the entire build and explain what I'm doing and why. And then by the end of this, I'll have this rendered. Got a big round of applause, got a volunteer, and for 30 minutes, I just hustled.
Right.
I talked through the whole thing. I made the plan as I went. I delivered on the promise. Everybody walked away. Steve did not get out of his chair. Packed up my bag, and he goes, that was amazing.
Cool.
He goes, that was the best presentation I've ever seen.
Nice.
He goes, it totally proved what After Effects is. Because the whole thing was to dismantle all of the beliefs that were being said about After Effects.
Right.
So the industry was basically had a negative idea of what After Effects was. They thought After Effects was a toy. So
you're also going up against big business and people making tons of money.
Yes.
And salespeople saying, who's this guy Dean, man? Because he's ruining we're trying to get rid of these $500,000 purchases.
Yes. Yeah. And I did a couple of more for them. They started bringing me to Promax. They sent me to SeaGraph. Heck, I did a lot. Right. And then one day they decided, why have you out there as a freelancer? Just move to LA. And the reason they moved me to LA was to push After Effects into Hollywood.
Ooh, cool.
So my job was to go to walk on the Warner Brothers soundstage and actually go and have meetings. My job wasn't to sell them. There was a salesperson there, and they were to sell them. And then the other half of the meeting was me just doing my song and dance tricks.
Cool.
It was exciting.
Right. So can you talk about a project or two that you guys did? Because I know you did some really cool projects.
We did our first Cartoon Network project where everybody was involved, and this was a Cine cartoon. And the neat thing about this was it was fully illustrated. I got 8 illustrators from the team, and each one built a segment, and we built a package for Cartoon Network. I think it lasted 2 or 3 years. Went over really well, and got us a ton of more Cartoon Network work. And all of the guys at the studio got to work on Cartoon Network, which to them was, the end of all ends. It was the most exciting thing that had happened to them as artists. That was a big deal. I mean, Cartoon Network built us. Okay. Basically, this is Cartoon Network Latin America specifically.
Okay. Cool.
And that's when we started changing direction.
Right.
And we just started building stories. We just started building left and right VR stories. And the only way we could know we're going in the right direction was audience response. Because no one was buying VR. There's no one who we couldn't get anybody to give us even.
That's the question. How do you make money off of it? How do you sell it?
You sell it by showing an audience and getting the engagement.
Okay.
So we started building our own projects. Remember, I got 15 apprentices who need something to do.
Right. Because you're not doing motion graphics anymore.
We're not doing crap. We're still waiting on jobs.
Right.
But I still had money to pay them. So we just worked on R&D. We just kept building VR stuff, building and building. And it just happened that one of the producers from Cartoon Network, Lila Bazar, said, hey, there's this VR thing called VR Day Atlanta. Maybe you guys should be in it. This was Tuesday. The show, no, this was Monday. The show was on a Thursday.
Wow.
We had nothing really finished. So I talked to my business partner and I said, hey, I'm going to send these guys an email and say we should be in this. And he goes, don't do that. We have nothing. So I went to my desk and sent the email anyway. And Annie Eaton, who's the CEO of Futurist, contacted me back and she said, we just had someone cancel, so this is perfect timing. Right. I can't say enough that my whole life has been perfect timing.
Right. You've been very lucky.
Yeah. Luck. Like now here's something important. Luck, but I've already been working on the project.
Right.
Like I've already been.
You're ready for luck.
Yes. I am ready to take advantage of luck. Right. That's the best way it can be said. Because luck alone cannot get you a job.
Okay.
And again, luck. TCM came in for a studio tour of Sprocket. And as they were leaving, Sean, I'm not even kidding. As they were leaving, they said, yeah, we need to get a new audience. We've been kind of thinking about doing something in VR. I'm talking about out the door. They said this as they were leaving.
As they're leaving.
And I got up from my desk and I said, don't go. Come back down. Put him in glasses, showed him Victoria, and said, let's set up a second meeting. I'm going to show you how this works. I'm going to show you how you can make money. I'm going to show you that you can get a return on investment with this.
Right.
I showed him that document. I think I wore him out at freaking like 60th page in.
Right.
And they said, you're the guys to do this. And not only that, this was crazy. This was a never before in my career, and it has not happened since. We want you to write the story. We want you to come up with the characters. We want you to come up with the strategy for social. We want you to come up with the strategy for monetization.
Nice.
And we did that with 100% freedom. They made some changes. Like I wanted to do some things that were from noir films that I had watched, but they were like, okay, that's a little bit too dark. And I said, that's fine. I'm just giving you a list of things that we can give the viewer that they would understand.
Right.
And we won a bunch of awards and opened the door to a bunch of stuff.
What would you say to a young person coming up that wants to do motion graphics or VR or work in the TV industry? What would your advice be?
Be self-reliant. The capacity to learn is in you. It is not in an outside source. Meaning there's enough material out there from books to YouTube, and I'm not downing school by any means. But you can learn all of this stuff, but you have to be self-reliant. And you have to know that this is important, that your education in this is important. And it's not a game. This is real. This is real work. This is real hours, and it's really hard.
Yep.
But the payoffs are amazing.
So cool, man. Thank you so much. This has been great. And the thing I would say about you, Dean, and everything I've seen from your demos to some of the stuff on Facebook is that you're original and your stuff looks very different from other people's stuff. And I love the look of it. And I love what you do. So thanks so much for this. This has been great. And I'm sure people are going to love to hear your story.
Thanks a lot, Sean. I really appreciate it.
All right, man. I will talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Lights Camera Pro podcast, where entertainment pros talk about how they made their dream into a career.
Subscribe to our YouTube page, like and share our Facebook page, and download at Apple and Google Podcasts. Thanks to Bob Juergens for the Rockin' VO and Joseph McDade for the music. Next week, we have Mike Moore, who is a producer and director for NBA.com, NBA TV, Inside the NBA on TNT. He's done some cool music videos also. Come check it out next week.